Good evening and welcome to the June 12, 2013 meeting of the Edina Planning Commission. My name is Kevin Staunton. I'm the chair of the commission. Jackie, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Shear?
Here.
Commissioner Schroeder? Commissioner Pott?
Here.
Commissioner Potter? Here. Commissioner Forrest? Here. Commissioner Grable?
Here.
Chair Staunton?
Here, thank you. Next up on the agenda is approval of the meeting agenda. You have a meeting agenda before you this evening. Are there any recommended changes or additions or subtractions? Seeing none, I'd take a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The agenda is approved. Next up is approval of the consent agenda. The only items on the consent agenda this evening are the minutes of the May 8 and May 22 meetings of the Planning Commission. Are there any revisions, comments, changes to the minutes of those two meetings? Seeing none, I'd take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The consent agenda is approved. Next up is community comment. This is the portion of the meeting where we invite members of the public to provide comment on issues that are not before the Planning Commission this evening. So if there's anyone here who would like to come up and comment on an issue that is not on tonight's agenda, this would be the time, and we'd welcome you to come up to one of the podiums and state your name and give us your comment.
My name is Dave Frankel. Address is 4510 Lakeview Drive in Edina. I just want to vent my frustration. I have a house going up next to me, behind me, 4511 Gulf Terrace. It's been 10 months of a long litany of complaints about the property, and I'm not talking about the actual physical house. I'm talking about the lack of enforcement by the city of Edina on various issues dealing with garbage, dealing with construction refuse, dealing with dirt in the street, illegal parking, blocking of the street. The city and the City of Edina Police take a very laid-back approach to enforcing code that is currently on the books. I've had police tell me that off-road vehicles with steel tracks are okay to run on our roads. I've been told by the Edina Police it's okay to block a road and block a school bus from going through. The main reason I moved to Edina several years ago was for the quality of the school system. I didn't know that the buses going to my children's school would be blocked by construction vehicles, not that they had to, because they could, because of the lack of enforcement by the Edina Police and the inspections department who refused to enforce current city code on some of the things I just mentioned. A few years ago, I mentioned I moved here from a community in Northern Virginia called Reston, Virginia, which is one of the first planned communities in the United States. 40 years ago, they did what we're trying to do here in Edina as far as urban planning. I, for the life of me, don't understand how Edina has literally been caught with their pants down on urban planning. In Reston, Virginia, you cannot take down a tree, literally. They use GIS inspection to make sure no trees come down in the community. Reston is roughly the size of Edina. Urban planning in that community is way beyond what Edina would ever expect to do, and to move here, I'm just flabbergasted by the lack of this urban planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frankel. Carrie, I assume that you will pass word along of that issue to enforcement staff. The city has actually adopted a construction management policy and process, and I understand is in the process of hiring personnel to lead the enforcement of that. And so I think Mr. Frankel, I assume that he has contacted staff, but to the extent he hasn't, I would appreciate if you would pass that along. Are there any other comments during community comment? Seeing none, I would take a motion to close community comment. And a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. The motion passes. Community comment is closed. Commissioner Forrest.
I was wondering, Planner Teague, Director Teague, could you tell us the progress that's being made regarding the construction management plan and the enforcement? I understand somebody has been hired. Could you tell us when they're starting and how that's all proceeding?
Certainly. Commissioner Forrest, members of the Commission, we have gone through the interview process. We have selected a candidate, Cindy Larson. She will be starting a week from tomorrow, Thursday, the 20th. So we look forward to some proactive enforcement on some of our residential redevelopment sites.
Is it safe to say, Carrie, that that the kinds of issues that Mr. Frankel just identified are within the scope of the duties she's expected to be carrying out?
Some of them will be. She will be the kind of the eyes in the field, inspecting some of the construction sites, and when she notices code violations, she would either handle it herself or certainly pass it on to the staff member that would be responsible for that kind of thing.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Grable.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to just say that Mr. Frankel's been very prolific in some of his writings, and I'm happy that he came to the meeting tonight to address his concerns in public at this forum. So I appreciate it when people in the community come and do address these types of issues to us and to the City Council. Thank you.
Very good. All right, next up on the agenda is the public hearing section, and the only item we have on tonight's agenda is zoning ordinance update on residential development. This is an item that we have been working on for some time. We began looking at our zoning code with respect to residential redevelopment last fall and have followed a process that Commissioner Platter is going to summarize for us this evening. And we have arrived at this point with some recommended language for potential changes to the zoning code. And tonight is a public hearing, and so here's how we're going to lay this out. Commissioner Platter, who chaired a group of 3 of our commissioners with Commissioner Forrest and Commissioner Potts, led a process to engage the community, provide community input, and identify issues that we should be addressing in the zoning code, or at least examining in the zoning code. And he's going to give us a summary of that process. That will give way then to Planner Teague, who will give us a summary overview of the language that we have developed out of that process. I will emphasize that the language is draft language. Part of the reason that we're having a public hearing tonight is when you are talking about potential changes, you need to have a draft in front of you so that you can look at what those proposed things are. The planning commissioners who are up here tonight will ultimately make a recommendation to the City Council on changes to the zoning code. And I can tell you on behalf of the planning commissioners that our minds are still open, and part of what we're looking for tonight is input from the public, and I'm glad to see that so many people have come out this evening to share their thoughts with us. So after Commissioner Platter and Planner Teague summarize both the process and the substance of where we've been and where we're going, we're going to ask for public comment from those of you who are in attendance this evening. I'm going to ask that folks keep their comments to 3 minutes, and that we get through as many people as we can. Everybody who's come out this evening, I want to give everybody a chance to speak if you're here and you're so inclined. Once we have received the public comment, we will have discussion among the Planning Commission, and we will make some plans and suggestions for staff. The plan is not to act on these items tonight, but instead take the public comment, direct staff to make any revisions that we think are appropriate, and then have this item come back to us at our next meeting, which would be the 26th of June. And we would hope at that time to be able to vote on recommendations for the City Council. And ultimately, these are changes to the city's zoning code, and they need to be made by the City Council. So our action will be a recommendation to the City Council, and then they will ultimately take the final action. So, Commissioner Scheer.
And we should probably add there'll be also a public hearing at the time that it comes before the City Council, so people could speak again if there are issues they want to clarify.
Correct. And I would also add, with respect to the public hearing, this is an important part of the process, and, you know, all of us who sit up here are residents of the community, just like all of you who are here this evening and are interested. And we have no corner on expertise. We do get to see these things on a regular basis, but we know that folks who live in various neighborhoods have firsthand experience about how the zoning regulations work in their community and their neighborhood, and we're very interested in hearing that experience. So I want to make sure that folks feel welcome to share their comments so that we can have all the information that's relevant to us before we make recommendations to the City Council. So with that, I'd ask Commissioner Platter to provide us with an introduction that gives us kind of an overview of where we've been, and then that'll be followed by Planner Teague summarizing the draft language that's before us this evening.
Thank you, Commission members and Chair. This is a little update as to how we got to this point. Most of you are familiar with it, but I want to just recap it for everyone that's on the Commission as well as the people in the audience, so they just can see the excuse me, progression to how we got to this point. So just a little bit on the timeline. Again, as Chair Staunton had mentioned, we had actually started looking at this back in November of last year, formulating some pieces to that. What that resulted in is this timeline right here. So just going back in time a little bit, we had public input forums in January, and a lot of people, I think we had about 50 people come to those. Out of those, there was comments to that, which we summarized, we went through. We initially did an update to the City Council at that point, and got talked to them about what was some of the next steps involved, and had a preview for them, and wanted to get their input along the way. Along with that, as part of what came out of that was enhancements to the construction management plan, and the council actually did pass a residential construction ordinance on March 19th. That for some of the things that included in there, and the position that's starting next week on the 20th was a common enforcement officer throughout the city. So that's one accumulation of that. Other things in there were about the hours of operation for construction allowed, that builders met with neighbors beforehand, let them know what's going on, and some other things in there. And I won't get into all the details, but that is published now and is being forced today. After those meetings with the commission, the planning commission, we met and went through these over a couple meetings, April, May, kind of honing down the list as to what was out there, what made sense, what was maybe not available to do, or went through all these pieces. And here we are tonight on June 12th to have the public hearing for those. So it's been about a 6-month process to get to this point. Again, as Chair Staunton mentioned, the next time we meet, June 26th, we'll have recommendations, final recommendations to the City Council, and right now they're scheduled to have hearings on those on July 16th. So those are the next steps. So just a little bit more background on this. When you're approaching this issue and looking at all these pieces, there's obviously two sides to every story. So Edina is very fortunate to be in demand place to live, where people invest heavily in their homes and the community and want to live here. As we went through this, there's not a single or a simple solution. There are many complicated issues. If, for example, if you move something one way, what are the implications of changes, unintended consequences along the way? So our goal is not to create more issues than were resolved. And then where do individual property rights and community rights intersect? That's always a large gray area, and a lot of communities struggle with this, as we are today. One person's dream home can become another person's house nightmare if something changes, or water drainage, or something's going on. How do we get at some of those items? Also, we looked at how do potential changes compare with surrounding communities. What's I wanted to say the baseline, but we're always in competition or comparison with our other communities, so that's a piece as well. And also, how do we keep city policies and regulations adapting to contemporary needs? As we went through this, some items that came out was just kind of a cleanup of the code in general, because areas weren't connecting and had done over time, but this was a chance to rectify some of those situations. So I just want to give this comparison chart as to when we started. So this is how it exists today with some of our surrounding communities with less restrictive versus more restrictive items. As you can see, for the most part, Edina is in the upper half of this, more restrictions today in these areas. Bloomington is right up there as well. However, in Bloomington, for example, there's a lot much larger, the lot widths are, it's a different type of community than Edina even, because because of some of the very large lots that are in that area. Edina is kind of a combination, about a third are smaller lots and about 2/3 in Edina are larger lots. So just some of the things we looked at, and this was from what we presented to council back in March, and some of the things we went through. So some of the specific recommendations we had was enhance the construction management plan, which is now updated. There's a new ordinance for that. More city staff enforcement. That position is hired right now. Additional penalties for construction violations. One of the things that came up is that builders now have to have a what's what I'm looking for, Carrie? The bonding, essentially some bonding on the site is for anything that comes up, for any damage that's done, or any penalties come out of that pre-bond before they start construction. Some other things that were suggested along the way were a tree ordinance, regulating soils, improved stormwater management standards for surface and subsurface water control, and the infrastructure impact on that, no egress windows and side yard setbacks, rear yard access requirements, and then eliminate a requirement for a two-car garage in smaller lots. Some general recommendations we also looked at were reviewing the single residential zoning district for lots under city minimums, which really any lot under 75 foot in width and 9,000 square feet is already under city minimum. So in theory, those cannot be built today, or make that lot today. Explore the buildable area definitions. Do we increase side yard setbacks? Do we increase the maximum building height and modify means of determining height? A lot of these things are about reducing mass on the lots. One of the options was to make lot coverage limits more consistent with the city code. As most folks are probably aware, it varies. Lots under 75 feet in width, the area limit or lot coverage is 30%, which is capped to some extent because I think it's 2150 is the maximum square footage. So for most lots under 70, about half the lots under 75 feet in width, the 30% applies, and then it scales down, and finally at 75 feet it's back to the 25% for other codes. Also look at, are there any front-loaded garage standards, position relative to house, and then, like I said, an overall update of the residential zoning code, kind of looking at it again, cleaning up things that may have been antiquated or not quite clear. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carrie then to go through the items that have come out of this process and the things that were for discussion tonight and the public hearing on these tonight. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner Platter.
So now to give you some of the detail of all of the discussions that we've had over the past several months based on those criteria and some of the issues that we've discussed, kind of boiled down to these 9 identified issues that are on the screen. So the way I'll outline this is just taking each of those issues one at a time and then addressing how the code is proposed to regulate or address each of these issues.
And you know what I think I might do, Carrie, if it's okay with the Planning Commission members, is maybe just pause at the end of each item to see if there's any questions from the Planning Commission on that item before we move on to the next item.
Sure. So the first issue is in regard to drainage, retaining walls, egress windows, and site access. Site access being from front yard to back, being able to access front to back. So this is the ordinance, the language that's before you. The intent here is to make our drainage regulations clear. This is one we've really struggled with.
If I can just interrupt for folks who are watching this, the yellow, highlighted, and red are new proposed language, and the black is the language that's currently in the code?
Correct.
Okay.
And if anything is struck out, we're proposing to take that out.
Is a proposed change? Okay.
Yep. It also suggests a setback requirement now for retaining walls. Any retaining wall that's 4 feet in height or greater, where a building permit is needed, they would be required a 3-foot setback. Site access, we're requiring a clear maintenance or access of 3 feet wide from the front yard to the backyard. You recall this addresses the issue of retaining walls being built basically from a house foundation right to the lot line. In order to get from the front yard to the backyard, you either have to go through the house or encroach on a neighbor's property. The intent here is to provide that clear path where you don't have to trespass. The next part of this is in regard to egress windows. And the Planning Commission had recommended a 5-foot side yard setback for an egress window well. The way the code is drafted up, I put it within the list of all the required setbacks for whether it's garages, attached, detached. It's in that massive list. And I included a front yard setback, a side street setback, a rear yard setback. I think the real issue here is just a side yard setback. We might even want to just strike out or put an NA for a front yard setback or rear yard and side street. We're really just focusing on that side yard setback. Something to consider as we go through.
As the code currently exists, there is no provision for how far they have to be set back, and aren't they identified among the list of things that are exempted from the regular setbacks, or not?
I don't believe they're listed as an exemption, but we don't call them out as requiring a setback.
All right.
Hey, just one thing on that, Carrie, I'd like to see that, to your point, I don't think the intent here is to keep on the front and the rear, which typically wouldn't run into anything, either NA or something on that. I mean, really the intent here is about the side yard, and if you have a 5-yard setback and getting that window well within that, it doesn't leave any area to get by or anything there. So I think that
Maybe
was the overall intent of what we
Okay,
wanted.
I'll make note to bring that back with NAs and those other categories. So that's really it on that first topic, if we wanted to stop and have any kind of discussion. What we still need to do in regard to this language is, in speaking with the city engineer, we want to get feedback from our water resource consultant, possibly Bar Engineering, that does a lot of work for the city. Have them look at that language. We want to make sure that we get this right.
And so I'd like to stop and ask any questions at this time, but I also want to wait. You know, we're going to get some input from the public on some of these issues too, so I don't want to wander into elaborate deliberation and discussion on this, but if you get some questions to help make sure we're clear on what Carrie's presenting, this would be a good time for it. Commissioner Potts.
Carrie, could you back up one slide? And I just want to ask about the maintenance access on item 3. Will that be a defined term then? Or I guess I'd suggest that we do define that just so that it's clear what we mean.
We could. We did have some discussion on that. That would probably be a good idea to define that.
So it is not currently a separately
It's not
defined
currently
term.
defined.
All right. Any other questions on this first item? Right. All right, let's go on to the second item.
So the next one is building lot coverage. This is another one we've had an awful lot of discussion on. And you recall initially we were considering, right now the way the code reads, as Commissioner Platter indicated, that for lots that are 9,000 square feet or less, the maximum coverage is 30% with a cap at 2,250. Any lot that's over 9,000 square feet, the building coverage is 25%. So we were considering the idea of having 25% across the board for all lots. The examples that are on the screen would be basically the result of if we, is that the right one? Yes, that is the right one. Sorry. So the way the code reads today with, say, a 50-foot lot, a property that's less than 9,000 square feet, they would be able to have building coverage of 30%. The max in this case for this scenario would be 2,025 square feet. At the 25% that we were considering, the building footprint maximum would be 1,687. After all the discussion that the Planning Commission has had over the last several months, we've decided to take that out. So the ordinance before you basically remains the same for our lot coverage. We still maintain that 30%. Any questions on that issue? It kind of leads in a little bit to the side yard setback.
Sure. In the ordinance text, where is your memo refers to page 6 as being the place where the lot coverage, but I can't, can you help us find where it is in the text of the?
Yeah, it's been taken out, so the language in the code stays the same. That reference may have been a carryover from.
So where is that language in the?
So it wouldn't show up in the draft amendment because we're not making any changes.
Right, but there must be some place where it's 25% lot coverage and 30% for properties under 9,000 square feet.
There is. It's just not included in the draft ordinance because we're not proposing.
Because it's elsewhere?
And we're not proposing any change to it.
And it's in another part of the code that is not this language?
Right.
Okay.
Carrie, can you talk?
Hang on. Chris, did you want to chime in on that?
It looks like it's on page 3. See, look at the top. It's not highlighted because it's
Very good. Okay, so it says building coverage.
right. It's still remaining the same.
Oh, right. And one thing to add, too, and this was part of the code clarification piece that Commissioner Platter talked about, defining building coverage. The way the code reads now, it's in a whole different section of the code, so we're moving in right into the regulations there on page 3, what is included for building coverage. So someone going to the code can see what that all
So on
entails.
page 3, item 1 talks about this 9,000 square feet or larger is a 25% building coverage. And then item 2 says less than 9,000 square feet is a 30% or 2,250 square feet. And then item 3, you've tried to more clearly define what constitutes lot coverage, what items are included. Because there's questions that have come up over time about whether patios or decks or gazebos or the like are part of lot coverage.
Correct. And while that language is highlighted in your text, it's not new. It's just pulled
moved.
from another section.
All right, very good. Other questions on this item? Commissioner
Carrie,
Platter.
can you speak to the country club and the lot coverage of 30% there for smaller lots? That was part of our discussion and what came up with that piece of it.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that the country club is developed the vast majority of the lots to that maximum, to that 30%. I think that partially weighed into some of our considerations for leaving that.
So a change to a flat 25% would leave, at least in that particular neighborhood, most of those lots non-conforming.
It would render most of that district as non-conforming, right?
All right. Other questions on this item? All right, let's move on to the third item.
Okay, this is our side yard setback requirements, and the ordinance before you does propose changes to side yard setbacks primarily for our smaller lots between 50 and 75 feet wide. This graphically, I guess I'll just start it out in steps. Any lot that's less than 50 feet in width, so 49 feet in width or less, we're not proposing any changes at this time. So it would be a 5-foot setback for those lots. Lots that are between 50 and 60 feet wide, currently those also require just a 5-foot setback. So any lot 60 feet or less under the existing code is a 5-foot setback on both sides. The ordinance that's before you contemplates requiring a 12-foot setback, combination of the two, with no less than 5 on one side. So that's highlighted here on this example on the left side of the screen. A 50-foot wide lot would be required a 12-foot setback combination of both sides with no less than 5 on one side. So if we have 5 on one side, we need at least 7 on the other.
So it could be 6 and 6.
Could be
but
6 and
It
6.
has to be at least 5 on one side.
Yep.
And a total of 12.
Right.
And that's for lots of widths between 50 and 60
and
feet?
60, correct. So the ramification of that without changing that building coverage requirement is that by narrowing up the buildable area in front, you get a longer, more narrow house. So as you see, under the existing code, on a 50 by 135 foot wide lot, you could build a 40 by 50 house. This would be the building footprint. Under the proposed ordinance, it would be 38 by 53. So there would be a 3-foot extension at the back of the house, potentially.
Commissioner Platter.
Does staff have any concerns or on the non-conforming lots that this would create? Or is that something that, because I think you get a certain percent, you can still build within that area?
Yeah.
Is it like 80 something?
It certainly,
Because this is going to create non-conformance
will.
as well, right?
It will, but we do have that non-conforming, if you want to build onto your home, you get 200 square feet to maintain the existing non-conforming setback. So that's 200 square feet on each level. So that might address some of those non-conforming issues. But that has been an issue that's been raised by, and I believe there's a letter that was included in your packet from a country club resident that had that concern.
Okay. Other questions on this item? All right, this has a second part to it as well, or you want to...
Yeah, we continue on.
So we got to 60 feet, now you're talking about between 61 and 75.
Right.
All right.
So the existing code, once you get to that 60-foot wide lot, requires today an increase of 4 inches for each foot over 60 feet, 4 inches on each side. So we get into this formula now for all lots between 61 and 74 feet wide. As suggested by Commissioner Platter, rather than having that formula in the code, let's put a chart right in the code so it's clear for people so they know if they have a 68-foot wide lot, the code will tell them exactly what their setback requirements are. So this is the table. Essentially, because of that 2-foot increase on the 50 to 60-foot wide lots, that carries through now, so we're still at 2 feet wider. So for example, today, on a 61-foot wide lot, the total would be 10 feet 8 inches. So you'd need a 5-foot 4-inch setback on one side and a 5-foot 4-inch setback on the other. So this takes into account that increase of 4 inches on each side as you move up in width. I don't know, I hope that's clear. It's yeah, I know it's confusing for people as they're trying to read through our code.
So the required setback would get larger as the lot gets wider.
Yes.
It already did that. It's
Right.
getting,
But we added a couple
Larger.
of feet. We added a couple of feet for that 50 to 60-foot range, and those would carry through.
That just carries through, right?
up until you get to 72 feet, and then it's the same.
Right, then it's basically the same as it is for over 75
Yep.
feet, which is what exists today,
Right.
10 feet on
10
each
feet
side.
on each side.
All right.
And then that continues through with any lot over 75 feet.
Commissioner Potts.
I'm just comparing the language in the chart with the language at the top of our page 5 and wondering if for consistency's sake, on this chart, it identifies no less than 5 feet on one side. We could say that basically on every line on this chart, right? And simplify the chart a little bit by identifying the total setback needed, and in every case, it's no less than 5 on one side. I don't know if that would make
Well-
things more clear or not.
The setback is the same for all lots between 50 and 60 feet. It's that
Right.
5 and 7.
Whereas it looks like it's more than I mean, as you get above 60, the minimum side yard setback is going to be more than 5 feet.
Oh, and that's
Right.
right, okay. That's right.
Yeah, that also increases throughout, too. Scales
Right.
up.
So it's getting greater than 5, okay.
Further questions on this item? Okay, and then there's a companion piece to this on the second-story setback.
Yeah, this is, the way the code reads today is that on a side yard setback for a house or a structure that exceeds 15 feet in height, you need to increase the side yard setback on the second story. I'm drawing a blank now, it's 6 inches for each foot, 6 inches for each foot above 15 feet. So it's kind of a stepping in on the second story. The ordinance before you eliminates that provision, so there wouldn't be that stepping in. The setback requirement would be the same at the ground level as it would on the second story.
And what have we found, so in other words, you put another 12-foot second story on. That's an additional 6 feet you have to step back from the side yard. So
Right.
maybe you're 5 feet from, your ground floor is 5 feet from the side yard property line. You go up second floor, you're going to have 12 feet, so you got to go another 6 feet. So the second floor would be 11 feet from the property
Right.
line under the current code. And can you share what, if any, consequence we've kind of seen or heard about building design as a result of that requirement?
It seems to be well received with the builders from the feedback that we're
But the
getting.
existing, what has been the issue with the existing?
It's driving design. It's not allowing the colonial type home, especially in the country club. We're losing colonials. So this would allow them to build that type of home.
Okay. Other questions on this item?
So it creates more housing or more stylish options then?
More options, anyway.
It
Or
provides
options,
more
I should say
right?
options. It doesn't create any options right now, right?
Right now,
No, it-
that setback is driving some house design on that
It
second
is.
story.
It
All right.
is.
All right, anything else on the third one, Carrie? Or are we on to the
No,
fourth?
I think we're on to fourth, which is
Okay.
building height. And
Which is
this
also related to that third item, but
Right. So the ordinance before you reduces the height to the ridge line, the very top of a house, from 35 feet to 30 feet for lots that are less than 75 feet wide. There's no change proposed to any lot that's wider than 75 feet. One of our builders, Great Neighborhood Homes, provided that graphic that's included in your packet that provides a rendering of what that might look like. So this middle line here, this dashed line, indicates the 35-foot maximum ridge line height. And down below, it's the same row. But the dashed line indicates the 30-foot ridge line, so kind of indicating how that would drive design, essentially, and that it can be done with a 30-foot max height to the ridge line. So just to provide some examples of what that might look like.
so just so I'm clear on this, so our existing code measures building height to the midpoint of the longest gable?
Yeah,
Is
we
that
do it
the-
both ways, where we take it to the midpoint of a pitched roof, essentially. And we're proposing to take that provision out and just regulate to the top ridge
Okay.
line.
And then the other thing about our existing building height, but we're not making changes to that, is it takes the average, so for the starting point of the measurement, it takes the average grade on the front of the house.
Correct, the average existing grade, so you
Right.
can't bring in fill to build that
I
up.
know we've had some issues in severe topography that are walkouts or that fall off on the back of the house, that does leave much greater than 30 or 35 or whatever it might be on the back side of the house. But we haven't made any changes to address that.
We haven't.
Okay.
The result with just making this change will bring that down slightly.
Bring the height down, okay. Commissioner Grable.
Would this change allow a flat-roofed house where a flat-roofed house might not be possible under the current ordinance?
Oh, I think it would be possible in the current ordinance.
Is it, okay.
Because you would measure still to basically the flat portion of the roof.
All right.
Commissioner Platter.
One of the things I think on the midline, what it was doing is creating some of these real peaked roofs, right? I mean, that was part of what was happening in there
That was
too.
part of why we established the max height to the ridge line 5-6 years ago, because they were becoming quite steep.
But when we take that, I'm sorry, the midpoint measurement out, now you don't necessarily create the large.
Right? Don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
Commissioner Potts?
And then I think one other aspect of this that we're not changing is the number of stories, correct? It's existing, it's 2.5-story
2.5.
max,
Right.
going forward 2.5. So
Correct.
for a flat roof built up as high as possible, you still can't put 3 stories under that flat roof.
Correct. Yep.
Does raise the question of what a half a story is on a flat roof. For really short people.
It's called attic.
Crawl space, yeah. All right. Any other questions on this item? All right, on to number 5, Carrie.
So this next one is a wall articulation. And that's the goal here is to try to break up the mass of a sidewall. This is one we've kind of struggled with somewhat. We looked at the Wayzata ordinance for a while there. They didn't adopt that. The ordinance language that's in your packet is taken from the city of Alamo Heights. And it's been tweaked somewhat with the help of Commissioner Carr, who's not here this evening. But the goal here is to try to break up that mass of a sidewall. I guess that's...
So the previous slide you showed where if we're going to increase the side yard setbacks, one of the potential consequences is that we'll have longer, narrower buildings. Then the issue is, what do you do
Correct.
about just having a long, solid wall? And so this requirement would require some kinds of architectural detailing that would break up that. And I know in a previous iteration we had something that required a 4-foot articulation, and we decided that was too great, so we're talking about a minimum of 1 foot
Of 1
to try to
foot.
create this detail in a variety of ways that you can do that. Questions on this item? All right, let's move on to the next item then.
Okay, the next is front-facing garages. So the way the code is proposed, right now we don't have a regulation on the size of a garage that faces a street. So the language proposes front-facing garage doors on lots 75 feet in width, that the garage doors that face the public street shall be no more than 9 feet in height and 24 feet in width, and shall not exceed 60% of the width of a principal structure. This is one we've kind of gone back and forth on the percentage, that 60%. I think we had 50% proposed prior, and the concern was, is that going to get you enough for a 2-stall garage on a more narrow
If you had
lot?
38 feet of house,
Right.
how does the math work?
Yep, so the math works on a 50-foot wide lot. You're allowed 38 feet of house in the front. You would get a garage door that's 22.8 feet. So it's 24 is kind of the standard that we see. It's a little bit tighter fit getting in, but it's still a 2-car garage width.
Commissioner Forrest.
I was just going to say, the way this is written now, it would apply to a detached garage in the backyard as well. So I'd be in favor of adding in the words St. Paul has in theirs that prefaces the whole thing with except in the rear yard.
That's a good catch. We didn't consider that before, but yeah, detached garage facing the street, that would apply.
Commissioner Platter.
Not to get into a debate on this, but one of the things I'd like to have seen in here was that the garage was a certain, it couldn't be or even with the rest of the house versus projecting out from the house. I know that was part of our discussion, but
So one of the issues that we have talked about, and for those who are contemplating public comments as well, is whether there ought to be some regulation that prevents the garage from being jutting forward closer to the street than the rest of the front facade of the house. And after some discussion, we decided in the draft language not to include that. But we
Just to put
haven't
my 2 cents in.
finalized that yet, so there may be further discussion on that. The other garage item that I recall, and no, that's number 8 that's coming up, so we'll talk about that when we get to it.
Yeah, and there's some language in your packet from other cities that talked about that, how far you could extend out beyond the living space with the garage. So there's some
Right.
examples if we want to get
And
into
we-
that
I'm-
later.
It sounds like we'll have further discussion on that during the deliberation
Yeah.
phase. Any further questions on the front-facing garage language? All right, let's move on to the seventh item, non-conforming front yard setback.
Yeah, this next one is, deals with an issue that we've faced primarily on the west side of town, our larger lots where we have quite large setbacks, anywhere from 50 to 100 feet. It's, we have a lot of non-conforming situations out there if a home is torn down and rebuilt because of those large setbacks. So we were suggesting some language that would allow you to, if you had a non-conforming front yard setback that was greater than 30 feet, which is our kind of our starting point for a front yard setback, that you could maintain that existing non-conforming setback. That's, as we've considered variances through the years, that's been kind of the basis that we've looked at. We've allowed a new home to be built at that non-conforming setback. In some conversations that I've had today with people that were concerned with this ordinance, and they raised a good point. What if you had say a porch addition that's 10 feet wide, or even a little point intrusion, kind of at a 60-foot setback? So it's just a small portion of the house that has a 60-foot setback. And the majority of the house has a 75-foot setback. The way this language is written, the new house could maintain that 60-foot setback. So you're providing more mass within that. So that's something to consider. Is there some kind of language that could address that scenario? I couldn't think up any suggested changes for tonight, but.
And just to be clear, our current ordinance measures the required front yard setback by looking at the properties on either side.
Right, it's the
So it's an
average of the
average.
two on either
Right.
side.
And the idea is, at least in a grid system, that you have kind of a uniform look as you look down a street of houses being roughly the same distance from the front yard.
Right.
We find that it's more difficult when you get into curved streets or cul-de-sacs or other less than rectangular situations.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions on this item? All right, thank you.
Okay, the next one is garage stall requirements. Currently, in Edina, we require a minimum of a 2-stall garage to be built with any new home. And so the language before you, although this didn't come out well on the screen, it now allows someone to have just a 1-stall garage for a property. It allows you to have a 1-stall garage as opposed to mandating a 2. So it gives the option.
For less than 75
For
feet.
a
only,
property
right?
that's less than 75 feet in width.
And I guarantee there'll be more discussion on this during deliberation.
Yes.
All right, any questions, though, at this time on that item? All right.
And the last category is just miscellaneous code cleanup. We have a provision in our code that talks about living space within an accessory dwelling, which we don't allow an accessory building to be a habitable dwelling unit, so we're just striking that language. It runs contradictory, so we're not exactly sure why it's in there, but we're suggesting that that be stricken. Also, within our floodplain ordinance, we define a variance and a conditional use permit process, which we already have that in our general regulations. So our city attorney has advised that we should pull that language out of the floodplain ordinance because it's redundant. We're already covered by our standard conditional use permit and variance language. So those are two kind of cleanup items that are within the ordinance before you.
Any questions on that item? Commissioner Grable.
Yeah, Carrie, could you repeat what you said about the accessory building and the habitability thereof? I couldn't quite follow it.
Yeah. Let me pull out that language. We have a provision that says accessory buildings, structures used for dwelling purposes. And then it goes on to, in a little bit more detail, if any accessory building or structure, or if any addition to or expansion of an accessory building is used or intended for use in whole or in part for residential occupancy, then such accessory building or structure or such addition or expansion shall comply with all minimum setback requirements for a single dwelling unit building. Well, that use is not allowed. We don't allow living quarters in an accessory building, so we thought we should take that out. It's confusing.
All right, any questions from the commission on those items? Okay, good. So let's move to the public hearing. Thank you all for indulging us as we went through this. I think it makes it easier for us to have a discussion on this item as we've broken them into these 9 pieces. Carrie, I'll ask that we just put up that list of 9 as people come up as well, so that folks can, you don't have to refer to it by number, but if there's a particular area, I'd encourage you to direct our attention to the item that you're concerned about, or items that you're concerned about. So I'd ask that folks who are interested in making comments come up, and unless you've got something to display on the table on the overhead projector, use one of the side podiums, and if you can introduce yourself with your name and your address, and you'll have 3 minutes to share your thoughts. If you have questions about items, please address them to the chair. We'll follow up after we've gotten the public comment and address those questions. So, first, come on up. Either one.
It's red.
Yeah, I'm not in control of that.
Okay.
Somebody in the back
It's
room is going to
red.
figure this out.
Okay. My name is Mickey Turk, and I reside at 6141 Brookview Avenue. Next door to me, Traditions by Don A. Holmes is constructing a new house on a 50-foot lot. As respectful and helpful and code-abiding and as much attention as he has paid to design value, Mr. Don A. is building a house far too big for the space. From every direction, the house looks like a mistake. My former neighbor, Barb Nelson, sold her house to Traditions by Don A. Holmes after learning JMS was going to build a huge house next to her on the north side. Unfortunately, afterwards, she left me with a giant house on my north side. Regarding the discussion on 75-foot lots and 50-foot lots and the difference between coverage, there should be no difference in my opinion. Too much coverage on any lot causes water runoff problems. When there is too much hard surface, especially when you consider the addition of a 10 or 12-foot driveway, water cannot soak into the ground. Instead, the water can potentially flood the neighbor's yard and driveway and or overwhelm storm sewers and streets. Next, something that wasn't discussed was code states that setbacks for garages are different than for houses. When a garage is attached to a house, it still feels like it is part of the house. If the garage is attached, it should be considered the same way a house is, whether it has a living space over it or not. Regarding fire hazards, if houses are built too close to each other, there's the potential for fire to spread easily and quickly. A good example of this is the massive house on Fairfax between 59th and 60th, which sits between 2 small ramblers. On the south side, the difference between the 2 homes' eaves is 2.5 feet. Now with the ivy growing over, it's about 1 foot. They are practically touching. I'm also worried about my house taxes going up to reflect the erection of new massive and expensive homes on my block. After living in my home for 25 years and finding retirement around the corner, I'm not looking forward to an additional financial burden. Finally, I believe that Edina City Council member Josh Sprague should recuse himself from voting on amendments to zoning ordinance 850 in the future. He is a residential realtor for Edina Realty and makes a living from selling homes. The bigger the house, the more he stands to gain. Mr. Sprague cannot therefore be considered impartial in voting matters such as mass, setback, and height of new construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Turk. I just note on so here's the deal on the. Let me finish that point first. On the conflict of interest issue, it's not for us to decide here at the Planning Commission. The city manager and the city council can address that issue with respect to Council Member Sprague. With respect to the comments here, I'd ask that folks refrain from clapping and cheering. I get it, but here's the issue. Somebody who might feel differently than you, it makes it harder for them to come up and speak then. They feel a little intimidated. So we want to make sure everybody feels welcome to come up and share their point of view, even if it's not the same as the point of view that others have. So if you can contain your enthusiasm, I'd appreciate it. All right, who's next?
Dave Frankel, 4510 Lakeview Drive, again, Edina.
Welcome, Mr. Frankel.
Again, concerning the property, 4511 Golf. My big issue, again, is enforcement. Under the current guidelines, topography of a particular property is not being enforced. This property I mentioned, the front yard went up 4 to 5 feet. The backyard went below grade 4 to 5 feet. And because of the heavy rainfall we've had, there's literally a lake in the backyard, approximately 5 feet long by maybe a foot deep. And that lake extends beyond its current property. With the change in topography, the water runoff was dramatically changed in that property from generally running to the street to generally running to the corner of the lot, including my lot. I've literally put up a small dike to keep this runoff off my property because there's been a complete lack of oversight by the city of Edina on this. In fact, the fence along the property on their north end of the property is essentially a dam. It's a dike holding back this water that's coming, I presume, from a sump pump that runs nonstop. So I'm facing a long-term issue here of what that, they haven't finished grading the property because of the weather, but I have no idea what they're planning on doing with that, and I have no great desire to raise the topography of this. The other thing is these retaining walls, for no discussion about safety. If you're familiar with Halloween, we have young children, including mine, going through the neighborhood. The wall in front of 4511 Golf on the north end, again, is 45 feet, and it drops to a cement driveway. The city currently has no code about putting up any type of barrier around these high walls. Also, the backyard of 4511 has a 4 to 5 foot retaining wall that's currently going up. I can't let my children play in that backyard when that new family comes in. I don't want my children falling off a wall. This whole area previous to this construction was flat, F-L-A-T. There was no retaining walls, no issues of falling off of things onto driveways. And I have a concern, again, moved to this community because of my children. Now I'm finding safety hazards, and part of that is due to construction, new construction. So this whole idea of height is really being essentially gamed by the construction people. And I see no enforcement of current existing codes, so I see no future that will be forced again, because I have, it's nonstop the number of houses that are coming down. And I'm sure the house next to me will come down in the future years, and I don't want to face this issue again. I'm essentially being boxed in by retaining walls, by height issues, and right now I actually had to spend money to try to save a large oak tree on the property line of this existing property. I had to pay an arborist to come out and tell me how much damage was done to my 150-year-old oak. And he estimated 30 to 40% of the roots of that tree were killed. So I had to pay to have pesticide as well as fertilizer put into the tree at a huge expense to me to try to save it. And I don't know if you saw the letter, but I can't even recall the developer, and sorry I'm going over my 3 minutes probably, but the developer sent out a community letter saying it was the property owner's fault for planting 2 trees to a property line. If I look 150 years old, I'll sell you some property somewhere. But these types of comments I'm just very tired of from developers and from the city who tells me developers have rights. I've been fighting the developer over this issue on code issues. I had a construction worker 2 weeks ago tell me to go inside of my house because I was taking pictures of him doing work. The city refuses to clean up the street. Last week I was out sweeping the street of dirt after a street cleaner came through and the construction workers left all kinds of mud behind. The city seems to have no idea what's going on. And from what I understand, what I've seen in the past couple weeks, I've talked to the Minnehaha Watershed District and the State of Minnesota PCA who have looked at 30 properties in Edina. The solution is to spend tax money and send around street cleaners on a weekly basis to clean up after contractors who by code are supposed to clean up their own mess. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frankel.
Good evening. I'm Kevin Gilligan. I live at 5804 Crescent Terrace.
Welcome, Mr. Gilligan.
Thank you. I would like to offer some comments regarding concern and strong opposition to item number 7, which is the non-conforming front yard setbacks. And I'd say the concerns fall into 3 categories. The first is that we just recently went through a very lengthy and expensive appeal process on a setback for non-conforming property directly across the street 5801 Crescent Terrace. And I think reviewing the circumstances of that might be helpful and illustrative to some of the challenges that this particular policy is addressing. The circumstances were that the house was sold, and the buyers of the property wanted to tear it. It was non-conforming. The buyers of the property wanted to tear it down and put a new structure on it, and they were seeking a 25-foot variance, which is a significant variance from the neighborhood point of view. And I believe this commission recommended that variance to the city council. So following a lot of neighborhood involvement, a lot of discussion with city council members, we were able to appeal that decision and arrive at a much smaller setback approval, which everyone agreed, including the city council, was much more appropriate and suitable for that particular lot. So our concern is that if this particular ordinance is drafted, it would overrule that decision, and we spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to arrive at something that was right for the neighborhood. So I won't go through all the reasons why we felt that the 25-foot setback variance was excessive, but I think the larger point here is it would be extremely disappointing, extremely frustrating, and I think grossly unfair, having just gone through that process, to have a new rule imposed which overrides that. I think the second concern that I would share, which is a broader concern, is that our experience in this particular instance would suggest that rather than having a single standard for nonconforming setback, each property should be evaluated on its own merit, because every circumstance is different and every property is different. I think, Mr. Staunton, you mentioned a grid system, and if it's in a grid system, it's one thing. If it's not in a grid system, it's quite another matter. We would agree with that. So I think for the entire community, having a single standard imposed in these circumstances, I think could create a lot of unintended consequences, and I don't see any reason why, in those cases, individual circumstances can't be considered. That doesn't mean there isn't room for a reasonable setback variance, but the impact of the neighborhood, and in the neighborhood that we live in, by the way, large front yards are a significant part of the neighborhood character, and we don't want to see that disrupted. And then I would say, lastly, the way the language is written, I think this was mentioned in the presentation, that you could end up with not only building on an existing non-conforming footprint, but because of the way the language is written, you could end up with a larger, more massive non-conforming structure, because you only have you can build right up to the setback closest to the yard. And in our case, at 5801 Crescent Terrace, that house is on an angle, so they would not only be able to build on that footprint, but actually bring the entire house forward more closer to the street. So I thank you for the opportunity to comment, and we hope that you will give serious consideration to our input.
Thank you, Mr. Gilgan.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Appledorn, 4611 Town Circle, which is in the White Oaks neighborhood.
Welcome, Ms. Appledorn.
Thank you. Which is close to Country Club. I don't know if you're familiar with that neighborhood, but I just want to make a couple of comments, mostly dealing with height and lot coverage, which, and I have to confess, I don't totally understand the changes or not lack of changes that are being proposed, but I would just like to point out that we live in a neighborhood which is in the one of the older parts of Edina, but happens because of our geography and geology to have big lots. We have larger lots, but we also have a lot of hills and a lot of low areas. So we have lots that are unusual, they're steep, they have hills, and because of that, the original developer back in the 30s didn't do a grid. We have cul-de-sacs, we have winding streets, and it does seem to me, the general comment is that the requirements we're looking at and yet, even though we have these larger lots, we have older homes that, for the most part, are smaller, Cape Cod, frequently Cape Cod style homes. So, especially that with the height requirement, it has seemed it doesn't. The strict rules that we have don't seem to accommodate or account for the fact that sometimes, just because you have a larger lot, it doesn't mean a larger house or a taller house is appropriate. So, I'd have a question about why the formula for calculating maximum height wouldn't involve something like the setback does, which is accounting for the average height on either side of the building. That would be a question. Another thing that's come up in our neighborhood frequently is that, knowledge is very helpful. And even people who are looking at changes or tear downs could be better informed if the elevation that's being presented would show to scale where the proposed home is in terms of height in relationship to the houses on either side of it. And I just don't see any reason why that wouldn't be, that in this day and age, I've talked to builders and developers and they say to draw an elevation and add that point of reference is not a big deal. With digital photography, computerized drawings, that's not a problem. It's not a major expense. And oftentimes, I think even the people who'd like to do these, make the changes or build the home would be better informed if they could see for themselves. Sometimes a number doesn't mean much, but when you see it in relationship on a drawing to other buildings, you might yourself wish that you had that information. So that's a comment we have. I also just have to comment, I don't even see a number for the question of impervious surfaces because I understand there's no change to that. But in our neighborhood, because we do have our low areas, we have really seen the impact of the increase of impervious surface generally in East Edina. And so we have a wooded area on Towns Road. The intersection is Sunnyside and Towns Road, which our neighborhood actually raised $20,000 to help buy part of. We donated it to the city because we loved our little woodland there. But if you drive past it now, you won't see a woodland. You'll see a swamp. It's now become basically a drainage pond. The city made a decision to direct water from the country club neighborhood because there was too much stormwater, and a portion of that water now is directed into that woodland. It's killed all the trees almost. There's a few left on the perimeter, but we've lost our woodland because of the increase in stormwater runoff. And I'm not saying that's anyone's fault at all, but I do think it's puzzling to me that as we look at this, we aren't talking a little bit more about the impact, and I see that other cities have done more in terms of regulating the increase of impervious surface. Seems to me it's something the city ought to be taking a little more seriously. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Phil Brodt. I live at 4820 Rolling Green Parkway. I would like to commend all you people for taking your time and volunteering to do this and to try to help our city be better. And I see that you're trying to clean up some things. And one of the things I'd like to talk about is the single-car garage. Edina is a very nice community, high-end, and I don't think there's anybody in Edina that probably doesn't own at least 2 cars. And I think they need to have a place to put them off the street, hopefully not in their driveways. And if you come up to the fact that you do have to build single-car garages, I think you should take a look at making the stalls bigger than on your double garage so they have places to store things. But I just believe that it would be better to keep with the standard or the ordinances or the codes the way they are. I also would like to comment on what Mr. Gilligan said. I'm in full agreement with him. He articulated very good, and I think that this is something you should really take a look at. The front yard, the non-conforming front yard setbacks, because every lot is different. And also, I know it's not appropriate, but I believe that Josh Sprague should also recuse himself from a lot of his votes. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who'd like to come up and share some comments?
Good evening. My name is Tom LaForce. I live at 5901 Tingdale Avenue on a 1,200 square foot house, in a 1,200 square foot house and a half-acre lot, which is also known as a future teardown. My comments are more general, and what I'm asking tonight is that you consider, as you consider the policies, you think about the effect it's going to have on what ultimately gets built in the city. My house is in need of repairs. I probably need new windows and a few other things. Real estate pros and it's not too hard to figure out on my own, say, don't put another dime into your house because it's just going to get torn down and you're sort of wasting your money. Just kind of hold out and go someplace. But my other problem is I've got no place to go. I want smaller home, newer, and where is that in Edina? I don't see it being built. I don't see the policies being instituted that would help those homes be built. And so I guess what I would ask, and maybe to echo a few of the points tonight, when we think about one home, evaluate each home on its own, and policies that, afford maximum flexibility. I'm okay with more density. I'd like to actually live in a small house on a small lot. I don't want to necessarily take care of a big lot anymore. And if there were those opportunities that came up, I'd like to think that there would be a way to do it. I mean, my lot right now could easily accommodate 2 houses, maybe even 3. I'm probably horrified to hear that. I got an access problem to get to them, but if there were small lots, small houses, I'd be okay with that. And I just am asking that you consider that, have some flexibility in your policies as you're thinking these things through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaForce.
Hi, Jackie Whitbeck at 6128 Brookview Avenue, and if I'm repeating, I'm sorry, I'm coming from work. One of the biggest problems I have with the way the code is right now is, for instance, in my specific situation, you've got a 100-foot lot next to you, but the house is built 5 feet from the property line. It should be 10 feet, but because the garage is attached and the living quarters are framed in at 10 feet, it's considered appropriate. And what I'd like to see changed is that when the garage is attached, it's just as if it were a home. It goes up like a great big wall, and I would like to see that treated the same as if it were a home. And the problems that I have because of that are just what I predicted when I first started coming here. The people cannot clean their gutters without being on my property. Liability reasons, I wouldn't want them on my property. Therefore, the gutters are full of leaves because they can't get to them, and the water drains off onto our driveway, which is right on the property line. We have little rivulets coming right into our rock driveway. In the wintertime, we have ice. Some of the other issues that we have are we can't maintain our hedge anymore. We have a well-groomed, manicured hedge, and on that side, we have no access to maintain that anymore. So that has just gone crazy. I'd love to put in some type of plant that grows at 3 feet in diameter and 30 feet tall in the shade. I can't find one. There's no recourse to cover it up. There's just no way. It's too tight. And this would be, true for a 50-foot lot as well. But when it's a 100-foot lot, I'd really like to see it treated as if it were, and it's attached garage. It should have a 10-foot side setback. The other issues with these big massings are they project so far into the backyard that everybody loses their privacy. Most people like to hang out in the backyard, barbecue and garden, do whatever. And when you have this big structure next to you just peering down, it just gives you the creeps. So I would, the best backyard setbacks should be addressed as well. And across the street from us, we have a new box, just a huge box, and that has no front door. It's just there's a side door, but it just literally looks like a huge box. No address, no front door. It's a box. So it'd be nice if there could be something where it could be inviting and look like a home instead of a storage facility as well. And basically, when you're so close, it just sets you up for bad relationships with your neighbors. No matter who they are coming in, you're going to have problems. Everything's so tight and close. It's just setting up bad situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woodbeck.
Good evening. I'm Dick Whitbeck. I live at 6128 Brookview Avenue, and my wife just stole all my thoughts. But anyway, the net effect of our current situation is that longtime residents are being almost literally squeezed out of their homes rather than live next to these monster houses. I mean, our situation is unchangeable. So I'm not here speaking on our behalf. I'm speaking on behalf of the neighbors in our community. Officials seem to be paying lip service to the need for low or middle-income housing. And this housing is eroding at an alarming rate. Just look at within a few blocks of our home, and you will see this transformation that is only positive for developers and builders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitbeck.
Good evening. My name is Mike Gano. I live at 6 Mary Lane Avenue. And my comment tonight is related to item number 7, the non-conforming front setback. The home next door to us, which is on a large lot, is for sale. We've learned that the real estate agent who has approached us and provided us with drawings, the seller is proposing dividing the lot into 3 lots. Now it's on a curved part of the street, so at the apex of the lot, the top, you would have 3 new homes. And given the current language with the setbacks, you would have homes now clustered and very close to one another at the top. And I'd just like, as you're considering some of these setbacks and the comments that were made earlier this evening, that you consider that in this case, I think 3 lots are too many for the current lot that's there. And with the setback requirements that you'd have, you'd create a problem with how close each of these homes would be, going from 1 to 4 as it relates to where we're situated. So I'd appreciate some consideration on that.
If I could just ask you a question, Mr. Gangle, are you talking about the side yard or how close they are to the street?
It would be the side yard.
So you're worried that they'd
be
stay
too close.
clustered?
It's 1 lot now with 1 home, and it's for sale, and the drawings that are being distributed would have that lot put into 3.
Got it.
And it's a pie-shaped lot, reverse pie, so you'd have 3 lots now, 3 homes.
So with the
where
point of
one
it at the
was.
back
Yeah.
and the curve around the front.
That's correct.
So on number 7, what we're talking about is the front yard setback, not the side yard setbacks. So the side yards would still have to comply with the requirements of the code in terms of the whatever number of feet it is for a lot larger than 75 feet.
Right,
it's
but
the
if
front yard.
all 3 are back due to the front setback, then you've got 3 homes that are going to be very close
I
to
get
one
it.
anotall
All right.
So whether
you're
it's the
saying that
side
they could all
impact
come
that's
forward
the rule, it's where they would need to meet the front setback.
Got
You'd
it.
now have 3 homes on a reverse pie lot where there's currently 1 home, so it's being subdivided into 3.
Okay. Thank you. Other comments? All right, seeing none, I'd take a motion to close the public hearing. So moved. And is there a second? Second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion passes. We'll bring the discussion back up. There are a couple of items I'd like to just touch base on from the comments that came up that were at least questions. They may not have been phrased as questions, but they raised questions in my mind that, Carrie, maybe you can help us with. Ms. Appledorn talked about impervious surface. We do not have impervious surface regulations. Is that right?
That's right.
So we have building coverage issues or limits, but we don't have impervious surface limits.
Correct.
And her point is well taken, and I know professionally she's very familiar with water quality issues and the importance of having space for water to percolate through and be cleansed. And it sounds like the example she cited is a good one. But in Edina, we try to accomplish that through lot coverage as opposed to impervious surface. So it includes the building, but for instance, driveways, sidewalks, other hard surfaces are not part of our building coverage, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Well, to respond to that or add to that, we are talking about managing water so that any change doesn't increase water.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that when we get to drainage. We can talk about that water quality issue as well as the volume and rate issue. I think it's an important conversation to have. But I just wanted to clarify how, at least as it stands right now, we don't have an impervious surface regulation.
Right, and so it sounds like it might fall in the enforcement category.
Right, well, or it might be a good idea. Commissioner Platter.
I just want to address the impervious surface. We did look at things like that, but as we were looking through a lot of these, it seemed that there'd be so many non-conforming conditions in that. For example, I have a small home myself with the garage in the back, with the road or the driveway back to behind it, and I did some quick measurements against the house next to me, which was a tear down, and it's a front-facing garage. And my impervious area in my home right now is about 50%. And the one next to me that was a tear down was about 40%. So when we got into those types of discussions, we thought there'd be so many, we didn't know where to put the percent. There's a lot of areas, a lot of other communities that have a 20 or 30%, but in general they have much larger lot minimums in those areas. So that's kind of how that didn't survive what we looked at. I mean, that doesn't mean we couldn't look at it again, but it was one of those things where you would have many situations where you would have huge non-conforming issues as you went through that, in particular on the smaller lots already. Anything with a small house with a garage behind it would be in that range.
Well, it would create an incentive to put the garage in front with a shorter
Well,
driveway.
it actually would, yeah. So.
And then Ms. Whitbeck identified a situation. I'm wondering, Carrie or Chris, if you can just kind of shed some light on this 5-foot, 10-foot, some exception related to the garage. Can you help us understand how that all works?
Yeah, a garage setback, whether it's attached or detached, can be 5 feet from a side lot line. The livable portion of a home, in the case of the lot next door, is 10 feet. But it is attached, so on a 100-foot wide lot, they do have a 5-foot setback for the garage next to them.
So even if your garage is attached, so if you had living space directly above the garage, that would have to be 10 feet?
Correct.
Okay, but the garage itself could be within 5 feet of the lot, all right. Go ahead, Commissioner Potts.
I had another question about that. Is there a height limit for a garage that does not have occupiable space?
No, but you'd still, if your sidewall height exceeds 15 feet, then you have to add to your side yard setback. So if you have a taller garage, say a steeper pitched roof, then it would end up being further away than 5 feet.
But we're getting rid of that, maybe.
Just to clarify further, but if you have what I'm going to call one of those more bullnose kinds of garages that isn't that much of a steeper pitch, it could be at the 5-foot mark?
Yes.
Okay. Under current code?
Correct.
And proposed code?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing that I would note is, in addition to the comments, and I want to thank everybody for taking the time to come and share these, they are important. It is, I think this was a good illustration of the fact that you all are experts because you've experienced things in your neighborhood. And when we're up here trying to figure out one rule that fits all the neighborhoods in the community, it's hard work. So we appreciate you sharing the experiences that you have and the observations you have. That's really important. There were also folks who submitted things in writing, and some of them were in our packets, as well as I know Ms. Turk submitted a letter, and we got a letter, email from Jennifer Janovi earlier in the day as well. So with that, I guess my suggestion would be that we go through these kind of one item at a time and have some discussion, and then provide, to the extent we can get some consensus, provide direction to staff for our next meeting. So if we can start with the drainage, retaining walls, egress window, site access issue. Commissioner Grable.
I have a question about the egress windows extending into the setback, and it seems to me to be a bit unreasonable to refuse an egress window. I can understand it maybe on both sides of a building, extending into both side yard setbacks, but why not allow an egress window at least on one side of a building? If you got a 5-foot side yard setback on both sides, or 5 and 7, whatever it might be. On one side, you cannot have the egress window extending into that, but on the other side, you could, and they've still got access to the back of the house. But I think it's a big advantage to be able to employ an egress window so you can make livable space on the ground floor of the building. So I question why we would prohibit. I mean, the way the proposed ordinance is written now, that would essentially prohibit any egress windows on the side of a house, on either side.
And so if we did that, we probably wouldn't, I mean, we'd probably be able to just use the language about having 3 feet to get around the side. Well, I suppose on one side you'd have 5 feet.
Or just restrict it.
You're saying on one side.
An egress window to extend into the side yard setback on only one side of the building.
Other thoughts on that issue? Commissioner Scherer?
The only thought I'm having is I'm trying in my mind to draw a picture of all the houses in a row of smaller lots and decide if everybody, because we can't control where everybody puts their...
Does everybody go left or everybody go right?
Yeah, does everybody go left, does everybody go right? Are there times where we could end up with people choosing the wrong thing and we end up without adequate access to the backyard, which is what we were trying to control in the first place?
No, but there's still 5 feet on one side of every house.
Yes, there would.
Commissioner Forrest?
Can't get your riding mower back there probably, but you can get your push mower.
Commissioner Forrest?
Well, I agree. I would not like, I don't want to see egress windows being banned completely from the side yard setback because of the extremely narrow lots. It can really, here you're already restricting the size of those homes on the extremely narrow lots. And so the living space is already limited. By allowing people to have some flexibility in lower level living, at least people are getting some more square footage without making their house go back another 10 feet perhaps. So I would like to see that and perhaps somehow preserve the fact that we keep at least a 3-foot access completely open on at least one side or whatever we have to do it, but I would like to not call out egress windows. I was going to ask, is there anything else that, what else can be in the side yard setback? Can AC condensers or anything at all be in the side yard setback? Okay. And the other thing with if you have an egress window, it doesn't mean you can't get your lawnmower across that egress window because most of the new ones have iron grates over them anyway, so it's pretty, you can have almost a flat surface. So, I mean, there is a possibility of doing it. I walk on
the overhangs, I know one of the issues that was raised in the public hearing is if you've got, so you're 5 feet from the property line and then you got an overhang, does the overhang count currently?
You're allowed a 2-foot overhang. We don't include gutters, so you could have a 2-foot overhang with
Plus gutters. And so then if it's spilling off the edge, you're 2.5 feet from the property line where the roof line is. Okay. Commissioner Platter?
I was just going to say I'm not in favor of allowing the egress windows in the side yard setbacks, whatever that's worth.
And yeah.
Because go walk along these homes, and what happens if there's a driveway next to the home and somebody puts in an egress window, you fall right into it. There's no covers on most of these.
But you've still got, on the other side of the house, you've got access to the backyard.
Well, it's not just about access, it's about safety, people falling into these things, in my opinion.
So a trespasser
could
falls in.
require, yeah. You could require covers if they extend into the setback, perhaps. I mean, it's a smart thing to do anyway.
Well, I do think one of the things that we, when this came up, there was some issues about when you have lots that are that narrow, you're trying to squeeze a lot along the sides, and if you're going to put an egress window, it's going to be, even if it's only on one side, there's a potential safety issue when you're only 5 feet from the property line to start with. So, well, I think we've, Commissioner Scherer.
I'd be curious to hear the commissioner's comments since we're on egress windows. I think it was Ms. Janovi in the letter that she submitted raised the issue of front yard egress and backyard egress windows. Particularly, she cited on the front yard, if you apply that to an existing home that's sitting on the already 30-foot setback, are we clear in our language what we're intending to allow them or disallow them? And I thought that was an interesting question.
And on that issue, I guess that is a question. I think the consensus was that we're not concerned about the front and rear yard
I felt
egress
that
windows.
that was the sum and substance of our last discussion.
And that was, Kerry was, we talked earlier about him changing it to NA for the front and the rear.
So is that it?
So just to eliminate it?
Right, so that we're not going to
There's-
worry, people can encroach in the setback on the front yard and the backyard.
Yeah, because I would have no problem with that,
With the
especially if
egress
they're
windows.
Right, that-
already, for the most part, meeting the 30-foot setback.
Right, so
Right.
the front and
Yeah.
back wouldn't.
Okay.
Generally, those
Be
are going to
fine.
be
I'd
much
be fine
larger
with-
setbacks.
I would support that, and I think that would address that issue.
And I do think that's consistent with the safety issue, because the side yard setback egress window issue was really more of a, you're walking around the side of the house when you only got a 5-foot setback, that there's a safety issue.
And I think one of the reasons that many of the current larger egress windows that are being installed don't have a grill over the top is, the idea is, it's because there's a lower level basement and you want someone to be very easily able to get out of the house if they have to. You couldn't have a small child down there who couldn't move the grill.
Or don't have the key with them.
Yeah, so I think that's why most of the larger ones that I've seen installed in my neighborhood do not have anything over them like the old small window well type did.
Is there so I hear a couple of folks who are interested in just making it one side. Is there enough support for that to direct Carrie and Chris to make that modification, or where are people at? Commissioner Potts?
I'd like to restrict egress windows to front and back only.
Oh, so you'd like to
I'm
keep...
with Commissioner Platt
Okay.
here.
Well, that's 2 to 2.
Well, you could
How
put
we
them on the
doing?
side, you could put them on the side yet, but you would just,
right,
you'd have to
you're saying in
modify
the
your home
encroachment,
to
right.
deal with it.
You're saying so long as they're 5-foot setback from the side yard, you can still use it. Just,
If they can maintain that,
right,
you'd let them have
maintain
one on the
setback.
side. Yes. Yeah.
So I
okay.
guess Commissioner Scheer and Commissioner Schroeder, do you have thoughts on Commissioner Grable's proposed change?
Mr. Chair, I actually agree with Commissioner Grable. I don't see any issue as long as you have one side that provides you access into the rear yard.
Oh, we're missing a couple of
You go
commissioners this
first.
evening. If
Voting
Commissioner
tonight?
Carpenter were here,
No,
this
we're not,
is,
but I'd just like to
this
get a
is one
sense
I'll
of what
use his
direction we're-
language. This is not one I'd fall on my sword over, but, I did relate to the people who, cited in our earlier public discussions and some of the commissioners that live on smaller lots, that it's so imperative that we make sure we have adequate rear yard access in the smaller lot areas of town. So I just want to make sure we've protected that and preserved that. That was the whole point of the discussion, I think, in the first place.
All right, so what I'm going to suggest is we make the change to make it just one side, and we can still have that discussion at the next meeting, but the language, the draft language we'll bring back will be just to have a requirement that there be a clear 5-foot, you know what we mean.
5-foot setback and only allow them on one side.
So it can encroach on one side, but it can't encroach on both
Encroach on
sides.
one side, yep.
Any other discussion on the other issues, the drainage and the retaining walls? We did hear a lot of comments from folks tonight about drainage and some about retaining walls. I am not going to remember who it was. It was Mr. Frankel, I think, who made the comments about the height of the retaining walls and the safety issue associated with that, which frankly is a good point.
That's a really good point, and
Yeah.
I feel like one that we missed in any of our earlier discussions. We didn't have the safety discussion very loudly, if we did at all. And I've, in sort of driving the grid around town, I am noticing that there are an increasing number that have that sort of fall-off capacity. I'm very familiar with, I grew up in the block Mr. Frankel's talking about.
Right.
I'm very familiar with that street, and that is a large wall now. And he's absolutely right. I don't know whether we ought to have some rules, if a retaining wall is above a certain size, should there have to be a fence on top of it?
Well, so I guess one question I have is whether that's a building code issue. Carrie, I don't know if you know
Commissioner
answer to
Grable
that.
had a comment too.
Yeah, one thing we've talked about in the past is if you have a retaining wall that is over a certain height, if you need a retaining wall that's over a certain height, you have to go through the variance process or something like that to get the review to get it.
So I did raise this notion of terracing the retaining walls, and Ms. Acker looked at me and said, you're not thinking of the west side of town where there's severe slopes that are going to need really tall retaining walls, but they're not the kind of place where somebody's, they're on the backside of a bluff or a area where they need that kind of thing.
And terracing is a little different than some of these that go straight up, where we then have a lot on top and a driveway down below. That you don't see so much on the western side of town.
So is there a building code requirement in terms of the railing or that kind of thing? No? Interesting.
Mr. Stoughton,
Yeah.
in your neighborhood, there's a retaining wall that's got to be about 50 feet high.
Does it have a fence on top
No. Somebody put a retaining wall on a hill so they could build about a, 75 square foot piece of lawn halfway down the hill. Otherwise, this retaining wall is honestly, it's 50 or 75 feet high. It's huge.
What do you think is the answer? Do you think it's fence requiring for certain heights?
I think if you want to build a retaining wall that big, you got to come to the Planning Commission and the City Council and ask for permission to do it, and then you examine it and decide, do we need to put a fence on it, or are we going to allow it at all? Because that clearly is, you talk about somebody falling into an egress window, if somebody falls off the back of that thing, they're really going to get hurt.
I think it's a very legitimate issue for us to look at.
Well, is there something with the proximity to the property line retaining wall? If it's then it needs some type of fall restraint or something?
Keeps people from falling on somebody else's property.
Well, some of these are right up to the, some are right on the line and kids running all around. I don't know. You're seeing a lot more of them, that's for sure.
I guess I'd like to discuss that further maybe in our next meeting if we talk about that.
Any language that you want to see, any adjustment to the language that we have now? For the next meeting?
I don't know if necessarily language, but I would like Carrie to look at it further and see if there's something obvious there. Either it's a building code thing potentially, or if there is something that would, based upon heights and distances or something, if there's something obvious
I
there.
wonder if any other communities have dealt with this. If we have any other language we could look at.
I'd like to know if it ties in any way with altering the natural grade of the property and how, some of our looking at that might tie in.
Well, generally people, a lot of the time, especially on the smaller lots, what people are using them for is to create a broader building pad. We have a lot of these houses that are terraced, the garage down lower than the house, and then when the tear down happens, they want to raise up one side to make it all flat, and then we have the nightmare scenarios that we've seen. So, well, it sounds like we've flagged this as a potential issue to address in addition to what we've got. Maybe Carrie and Chris, if you can do a little bit of thinking about how we might address this.
We've asked engineering to comment on the retaining wall issue as well, especially that setback requirement. The question came up about how other cities regulate that, and the setback requirement comes from Minnetonka. They require any retaining wall over 5 feet to meet a side yard setback. Now, their lots are much larger than ours, minimum lot size half acre there. So it's, with our smaller lots, requiring a setback is a little more problematic, but we'll have some suggestions from our engineering department.
I just think about some of the large lots on really severe topography on the west side of town that, Chris, you really pointed out when I was thinking about the terracing idea, that we just got to think through that, and I guess I'd appreciate some thinking by staff about what the consequence of doing something, as you kind of think around town to the different character neighborhoods, whether a one-size-fits-all rule is going to work, or maybe, as Commissioner Grable was suggesting, there ought to be some circumstances under which you got to get a variance or you got to get a conditional use permit or something. Okay, other issues on this first item? I guess I'll raise the drainage issue. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of controversy in this, at this table, about making it so that somebody who comes in and to a property can't increase the rate, can't point their stormwater at their neighbor and fill up their basement. I think everybody's pretty, I don't think we're going to have a lot of disagreement about that. So this, we talked about the language including both direction as well as volume. So existing drainage rate and volume shall not be increased, and direction shall not be altered to redirect water to adjacent properties. So the question is whether, you know, if somebody comes in and changes, so they're going to build a bigger house, it's going to create more stormwater runoff. They've already got a drainage pattern that some of the drainage runs to a neighboring property instead of out to the street to whatever the city's stormwater system is. Is this language handling that? And, you know, I had a conversation, Carrie, with you before the meeting, and you suggested that the city attorney had reviewed this and thought that it might be helpful to engage some additional kind of outside input on how to tackle that issue. You want to share that with the rest of the Planning Commission?
Yes, certainly. I did have a conversation with the city attorney and the city engineer in regard to this language. And Wayne, the city engineer, had indicated that we would set up a meeting to talk with our stormwater consultants next week. We want to be clear on this language where we're not making a situation worse in terms of rate, volume to the neighbor. Understanding that there will be some runoff going to the neighbors' properties. We just don't want to make situations worse. And if there's a problem now, correct it as part of a new. But the idea is to come back with some language that has been reviewed by our stormwater consultants.
So, and this goes to, certainly goes to the kind of volume, and this is the kind of flooding management, if you will. Mm-hmm. But it it doesn't address the water quality issue, because we're not talking about any requirements. We're just talking about managing how the water exits your property.
Right.
Is there, you know, I guess that's one of the questions, is whether there's water quality issues that we ought to be, you know, is that a topic we ought to be including in these regulations? Or are there other places that we manage that in different ways through citywide kind of quality management issues?
We're dealing more with the single-family homes residential, with the bigger projects where that comes into play. The watershed districts are our regulatory authorities over that, so I think that might go beyond what we're looking at here.
Commissioner Forrest.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing, you know, what they have to say, especially when we talk about the smaller lots. When natural drainage patterns are interrupted with a new footprint of a building, it seems like that's where the impact could be very easily discernible, but maybe harder to address. So,
Well,
ask them to see if they can come up with anything about that.
Commissioner Grable.
Just to be, as I read this language, existing drainage rate, et cetera, it sounds to me like what it is saying is that you cannot add you can't add any rate or volume to your neighbor's property by building on your lot. Does anybody have a difference of opinion about what this says?
Well, I think we have to add the word volume back in. We don't have it in currently. But
Right.
But assuming we add that in, then I think you're right.
Okay.
And then is this an enforcement issue? Is that the question, Carrie?
Yeah, that's the intent. And it's an enforcement
Because it's
issue.
clearly happening. I mean, we have people, Mr. Frankel isn't the first one to come and
I mean, there
we
may
hear
there
this
may
all
be
the
an,
time.
there, if you tear a building down and build a new building, you may increase the rate of runoff from that building.
But
You may have a
why
larger
shouldn't
roof for something like that, whatever. But what this is saying is you can't put any more water on your neighbor's property than what's there now.
Right.
That's how I read that
Right.
section.
Actually, I don't think that's what it's saying. I read it to say that you can't increase the rate of runoff. If there's 5 CFS leaving the site today, you can't increase the rate at more than 5 CFS in the future. I think we have a difficult time controlling volume because we don't control how much it rains. If it rains a lot, we can't require someone to hold more water on their lot than what they have today.
So why don't we require them to run it to the stormwater system instead of to the neighbors? I mean, isn't it predictable that if somebody puts a new house with more hardcover on a lot and we have a natural drainage pattern that goes to the neighboring lot, that more water is going to end up on the neighboring lot?
But what this says is that can't happen.
Well,
Actually, I think what it's saying is the rate can't increase. The rate and direction can't change. So if there's a certain rate of discharge onto a neighbor's lot, that rate can't increase. You can put more water off as long as it doesn't come off any faster than what it is today. That's what this is saying. That's how I read it.
well, and so the question is whether to add volume. And are you saying that you just really can't, as a practical matter, manage volume?
If you can control how much water falls out of the sky, you could, but you can't
We'll work
unless you're
on
going to
that.
hold it on your site. And then the issue is, what do you do with it once it's on your site? You have to get off the site some way. The way to control it is to direct where it goes, but to manage the rate of runoff off of the site.
And certainly you want the rate to stay the same because you're going to allow for more percolation on the site, assuming you have any place for it to percolate.
That would be correct. If you want to if you have more hard cover and you need to maintain the rate of runoff, you can either hold more, infiltrate more, store more to use for something else, but you're not going to increase the rate at which it leaves the site.
So isn't rate volume per time?
It
Simple here. And so, I mean, as you're talking about it, normally I would think of rate as how much volume passes per unit
Yes.
of time, but I'm not sure, is that addressing the volume part here that you're concerned about?
Well, if you're saying that a gallon leaves today and you can only have a gallon leave in the future, how do you control that amount?
No, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I'm just wondering if we're talking about all this concern about volume as it stands, this is addressing it kind of obliquely when you're talking about how quickly that volume is allowed to leave.
So maybe what we need to do, I think what we're trying to do is say if somebody dramatically increases the impervious surface on their lot by building a bigger house or by paving more of it, they're not negatively impacting their neighbor. And if we need different language to get there.
And it sounds like, I'm not sure we want them running a faster rate of runoff into the city's stormwater system either.
I don't know. I'd like to hear from engineering. They seem pretty comfortable with our infrastructure. I've asked that question.
Well, I think that goes to the water quality issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're going to have better water quality if you keep it on the site and let it percolate through than you would if you run it. But unless the city is going to do something to treat the quality of the water after it gets in their stormwater system. All right. So.
Yeah, I think the goal is to come back with some new language. I may invite the city engineer to our next meeting and maybe even our water consultant, where we can continue this conversation and they can answer a lot of
So we
these
can express our
questions.
frustration to them. Hopefully we'll come up with some language that can accomplish what, I mean, I think we all are on the same page in terms of what we want to happen. So if you can, I think that would be good if we can suggest some language that tries to get more effectively to what we're trying to accomplish, that would be great. All right. We're already through one item. This was a short meeting. All right, building lot coverage. Do we keep the 35% exception or don't we? What is... Any thoughts? I remember there was some discussion about this in our public comment.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Potts.
I don't have a direct answer for you, but a thought. I guess we've heard the issue come up a couple of times tonight about creating a new non-conforming situation. And I think we've got about a third of our city lots that are non-conforming in size already. So I don't buy that as a logic that we're going to create a new non-conforming situation on a lot that's already non-conforming. I don't think that's a reason not to do something that may be making an improvement.
You know, I know the materials that Jennifer Janovi submitted to us just before the meeting address a lot of this, and it may be that what we need to do is just try and digest some of the suggestions she's in essence arguing to eliminate the 35% lot coverage on these lots of less than 9,000 square feet. Just make it 25% citywide.
30%, not 35%. It's currently
30, sorry. Well, 30. Oh, I'm sorry, 30%, right. So eliminate the 30% and just make it a straight 25% lot coverage citywide and deal with the nonconformities, deal with the variances, whatever the case might be. And I guess what I would suggest is I don't hear definitive kind of ideas about changing the language between now and the next time we meet. What I'd encourage people to do is look at her arguments, because I think she has, whether you agree with them or not, she's got substantive arguments there that, you know, we all should be thinking about before we have to decide on which route we'd like to go on this. Any further discussion on that? Commissioner Forrest.
I'd just like to point out for those who don't have this that one of the things she actually suggested was a sliding scale of lot coverage for those smaller lots, similar to what we were talking about for setbacks.
So there may be another alternative as a way to address it, is my point. So, but I think we can keep the language that we've got for now. Let's, but folks should be thinking about that issue. It's a big issue. The third item on side yard setback, including the second story setback requirement. Thoughts on that? Any interest in changing the language? Commissioner Grable.
I just think that's a good idea so we can encourage some colonials.
So the second floor setback, you like eliminating that extra
right,
setback?
I like the proposal a lot because, you know, we got a lot of cottage houses being built. It'd be nice to see a colonial being built once in a while.
Commissioner Scherer?
I concur. I just feel that when we made the change before, we were well-intentioned, but we didn't realize we were going to be driving that amount of design across the city. And so I would like to try to do something to moderate that.
How about the side yard setbacks? Are people comfortable with where we've got it now, at least for discussion at the next meeting? Or Commissioner Forrest?
I'm struck. I think there's merit to look at the setback for attached garages as it was brought up today. That if it's an attached garage with living space,
should meet the rest of it.
Pretty much it's when they're attached that they, especially on the larger lots.
Yeah, I agree with that. That seems, I didn't realize that was the way it was.
So right now, if you have a garage, even if it's attached to your house, that garage can be within 5 feet of the property line, even if you have a 10-foot setback requirement. And so what I hear Commissioner Forrest suggesting, right.
So just so I'm clear, for bringing this back, you're talking just for lots over 75 feet in width?
Oh, that you get, yeah, because the...
That was what was mentioned, was especially on these larger lots, and it's easier to consider that change on the larger lots. So, I mean, the setback's going to be narrower anyway, where we eliminate that whole height differential, that step back height requirement and setback thing that we have now. I think that if we're addressing the side yard setbacks already, that perhaps it's not that big of a difference. I don't think that having living space above or below should make any difference.
I think that's the key point. I think if a garage is attached, that dwelling should be the dwelling. It should follow the full setback requirements.
And I would say that for all lot sizes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, all lot size, not just above or below 75 feet.
You know where this goes next. How close can it be and still be detached? That's all right. That's one at a time. One at a time. Yeah, can it have a breezeway? All right. Exactly. All right. So if you could work on some language on the garage thing, but otherwise it sounds like we're in good shape. Building height. Thoughts on the change to 30 feet to the ridgeline. This kind of goes hand in hand, especially with the second story setback. We did have at least one public comment reminding us about topography and its impact. You know, we certainly, right now, we measure from the average of the front yard, and so there's some severe topography situations where the back side of the house is very tall from the ground. And I didn't detect in earlier conversations an appetite to change our starting point. Is that still the case?
How would you change it, though?
Well, you could do an average of the, you know, where the building emerges from the ground.
Which would create taller homes on flat lots.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's...
Yes, it would.
Yep, you fix one and you...
Yeah.
And I do think, you know, topography is one of those things that is the classic variance. You know, when you have a really severe topography, those are the variances that I think we find the most appealing, because you've got an odd situation that, you know, somebody might come in for a height variance because they've got a really odd variation in height on the lot. All right, so I don't hear a lot of...
I say just in general, I like reducing it to 30 feet for that.
And going to the ridge line instead of
if you just look at the drawings in there, the massing effect it's a disproportional difference in my opinion. So.
All right.
And let's keep in mind, when we're talking about changes like that, we're talking about that change on the smaller lots, that there will be taller houses on the larger lots in town still. It's really easy to get hung up on the fact that, oh, they're reducing everything around town, and that's not the case. It's more and make things fit in.
Right, so it's the lots of over 75 feet in width still have the 35 to 40 foot. Right. Okay.
I know one of the comments, I forget who was from, was on should it address the homes on either side of you.
Oh, yes.
And
I think that was Ms. Appledorn.
Yeah, at least my opinion on that is that if you do that, you're going to have so many different. You have a rambler on one side or both sides, and then the building in between can never build a two-story. And I don't think that is fair to that homeowner there, that because what's next to them, they're all of a sudden limited to what they can build on their lot.
Well,
So
I took her comment to be a submission requirement as opposed to a standard. And I would say that there are lots of times where it would really be nice to see. We run into that all the time, where we're wondering what is the house, and especially like we do these 1 foot CUP variance things with the grade level. I think it would be really nice to have that graphic to show.
I'm for the graphic. Don't get me wrong there.
Okay, so you'd be fine with changing the submission requirement.
I've actually asked for that many times. Yeah. As well as everyone else has.
So you're saying don't prejudge what we would do with that information, but...
Correct, but that should be there.
Okay.
Are you saying for every house built they have to do that?
I don't know. Sounds like you don't
It's
think
another
that's a
ex-
good
it's
idea.
It's another large expense that we'd be putting on.
Well, definitely if it's a variance.
We do require that for variances now,
Oh, do we?
I guess I haven't been
for
noticing
height
it.
and the 1 foot rule, yeah,
Well,
that's been
Oh,
pretty
and
But I
for the
would,
CUP
but
and
I
the
would,
1 foot rule?
I would argue whenever there's a variance, it should come in like that, showing that. For anything, any variance coming in, that it does show the adjacent homes in scale, right? I think that's what isn't that what we're asking?
Right.
That's what we're asking.
Yeah,
Because otherwise we have nothing to compare, I mean,
Or at least
how many times have we
close-
looked at it and went, what is this really?
Like the setback variances, the surveys usually show where the adjacent building is. Is that a requirement?
You can just tell us to do that and we'll do it.
Do it.
We can just
Okay.
add that
Do
to
it.
our,
Yes.
add that to our requirements
Yes.
for our
It is-
applications for
it is
variance
helpful.
and conditional use.
Yeah, all right.
Because
Well, that was easy.
if it's,
Can we do all of this that way? No.
We should see how it relates to the houses next door. We should see the location of the houses on either side. And we should also see clearly a drawing that shows the proposed footprint versus the existing footprint.
That's the thing I was also thinking of on together. So you can easily look at it and it's shaded out what the new and the old one is, right?
Oh, yeah, that has come up in the past. Right, all right.
and having that drawn to scale, not only height-wise, having the elevations accurate, but having that distance between the homes shown could be helpful in a situation like was mentioned here, if you end up with a cluster of homes in a subdivided lot. At least you can see how it looks compared to the homes next to it.
All right, item 5, the sidewall articulation. Are folks comfortable with the language the way it has? Do you have any thoughts? Any appetite for changing that? Commissioner Schroeder?
Can someone explain the term rescission?
Rescission.
Rejection and rescission?
Would that be recession? It's a recess, but it's not a recession? So are you... So in the ordinance language, is that what you're referring to, Commissioner Schroeder?
On page 11.
Page 11.
10-foot offset with rejection or rescission.
The length of an exterior wall shall not exceed 30 feet without a minimum of at least 1 foot by 10 foot offset, projection or rescission. All right, so you have to do something with the word, receding, maybe is a better word. Okay. Any other, Commissioner
When I'm
Forrest?
looking at that, I'm sorry, maybe I'm just being too literal, but I'm going 1 foot by 10 foot, which is height, which is width. Could somebody, could interpret it differently, and what would the effect be? I mean, I can assume, yeah, but
Oh, so let's add some language that talks about the depth being 1 foot.
is the 10 feet, then you have to have
10 foot of length
of that change?
right.
Okay, okay.
Rescission is not the right term here.
All right, so we'll find a substitute. We'll get the thesaurus out
It's
for
a law
rescission.
term.
Anything else on that? Good catch, Commissioner Schroeder. Number 6, front-facing garage. I think there was identified in earlier discussions was Carrie, I think we need to do something to exempt the garage that's in the rear of the property. So it is technically front-facing, even though it might be all the way back of the property. So we have to import some language that can make that change. All right.
So just to clarify, so the except in the rear yard would mean it's attached to the house, but it's facing back, or it's detached?
It could be
When the
detached
garage-
or attached, but if it's in the rear yard of the house, then...
We don't care.
We don't care, yeah.
Okay.
If it's attached in the back, it's probably not facing the front.
Exactly.
That would be true.
So if you can work, Carrie, on that language. Carrie, so you get the point on that? Okay. Commissioner Platter.
So I'll make my pitch again that the garage is either the same distance, same plane as another piece of the house, whether it could be a porch, whatever, but it's in the same even plane in my opinion, but I'd be open to
Well, there's a lot of, I think what came up.
Not rescission.
I think what came up is there are a lot of homes, and you see around town where almost kind of the ranch house where the garage is further forward from the front door, and there's kind of a porch that then runs into the side of the garage. So that is offset from the front facade.
But I would be okay with that because there's a piece of the house, it's not livable space, but there's something out that is even with that. However you
I
define,
see.
you know what I mean?
So you'd be okay with it if it was a front porch that then became flush with the front of the garage?
Correct.
Even if the doorway was set
Is
back
3 or
into
4
that.
feet back, yes.
Or you could. I'm recalling that we had a long discussion about this the
Yes.
last time, because I did some canvassing. There are a number of houses in town that are on larger lots, mine included, that has a garage front that isn't abutting a porch that sticks out more than 12 feet.
Well, they're definitely out there, but the point
And
is,
I don't think there would be any reason I would want to codify, there's nothing offensive about it. It's on a it's an intermediate-sized house on a pretty large lot. There's nothing that would offend you about it, I don't think, Commissioner.
come drive through the small lots and see if it offends you.
So would you apply this only in the small lot area
I
of
would
town?
say under 75 feet.
Well, and that's what this regulation
That's what
is,
this
just for
regulation
less
Okay,
than
you would only
7 feet.
apply it there.
Correct.
Well, some of them, they go by not, it doesn't have to necessarily be even or recessed with any part of the house, but they say it has to be not extend further than 5 to 10 feet, whatever they decide, in front of the living space of the house, or that it's, that it's within a certain distance. And the whole point, or it have living space above it, is what one of the codes that was provided for us had
I
too.
guess the question is how much we want to get into design preference.
But a lot of this has to do with the fact that when you have the garage, like we were saying, it can't be more than 60% of the front facade. That's when it starts to hit, is when you've got this thing sticking out, and pretty much all people see is a garage. If there's no living space above it, or if it's way out in front of the house, then you get the effect of a storage building, as was mentioned. And I think that's what the concern is on some of the smaller lots.
And that's what they look like they only look like a garage. You don't even see anything else to them. On a
The
small
question is-
lot.
The question is whether if you're limited to 60% of the front, are you really going to push? I mean, to me, what we're trying to prevent is those houses that are all garage in the front, and you literally go around to the side of the house to enter it. And so then it looks all garage. And if you limit that to 60%, are you really going to take 40% of your house and push it all the way back?
I don't know.
I guess I wonder if we'll remedy
you
it.
could.
Are you defining facade as the absolute front part of the house,
Yes.
as opposed to what the house presents to the street?
It would be everything that faces front. I assume that would be our...
That's how I interpreted it.
Right.
Regardless of whether or not the garage and the porch is offset. So you seem to be saying if the garage and porch is offset, then somehow or other, I'm not sure. I'm not understanding.
So I think
the
that
argument.
I think that some of the concerns we heard were these kind of what you'd call a snout house, where it's all garage in the front. So one way to address it is to say a certain percentage of the front face of the house, there's a maximum on the percentage of the front face of the house that can be the garage. And then what Commissioner Platter is suggesting is, in addition to that, we ought to regulate the juxtaposition of that garage facing with the rest of the facade of the house. So prevent someone from putting the facade of the house further back than where the garage is. Or vice versa, prevent the garage from going further back. I suspect we're not concerned about that.
I don't think you'd see that. You usually see the garage sticking out.
And what I'm wondering is, by creating the 60%, isn't it going to take care of itself? because people, why would somebody take 40% of the front facade? If they got to have that much of the front facade that's not garage, why would they take that much and put it back unless they had some good design reason for it? I don't know. You're giving up a lot of, what's that?
40-foot lot? I mean, sometimes you're really limited on what you can do. I guess for me, I would like to see it be that the garage can't extend more than 10 feet in front of living space of a house. That means if there's living space above the garage, and that's all part of the facade, that's one thing, but then the house could still be set back, whether it's 10 feet or some other arbitrary thing, somewhat, so there's some flexibility, but you don't have a full garage sitting out in front of the building or the living area of the house.
Okay, so Commissioner Forrest and Commissioner Platter would like to see us change that language. How do other folks feel about that?
I think in general, I agree with that. I think we should be careful about rushing into this without making sure we haven't considered the unintended consequences. There are a lot of garages turned sideways and set in front of the house. And
Sideways would be covered, right?
that'd be this is only front facing.
I mean, that was my interpretation of it.
But if you do that, then the entire garage is forward of the living space on the front facade for the rest of the house.
You do what?
Turn
You
it
have a sideways
sideways.
facing front garage.
Yeah, you could
Right,
game it
but
that
when
way.
you- it
But then
looks-
it doesn't look like a garage.
It doesn't look like a
That's the
garage
point.
either.
The facade, we're talking about the garage door face to the
That's
street
yeah.
being more than 60%.
So
If you turn it, this wouldn't apply then.
I'm nervous about that level of design regulation, personally, but we can draft the language that way and take a look at it. So you want to try some language about that articulation? I'm got to be persuaded myself, but
Thanks.
But this, gives us a couple of weeks to make that happen. Yeah. All right. Anything else on the front-facing garage? All right. How about the non-conforming front yard setbacks? Some folks made some interesting points, I think, about. It seemed to me that there were a couple. Mr. Gilligan had echoed the point that Carrie had made about what if you got just a little piece into the front and then the camel's note is in the tent and now you got the whole tent. Commissioner Forrest, you were aching to say something.
I am. Just really antsy tonight, I guess. I'm wondering if we could tie in that 200 square foot concept to this. I'm not sure how we could, as far as,
Not more than 200 more square feet.
Is it?
I'm not sure you can, depends on how angled and protruding things are, I suppose, but if there's any way we could limit that impact somehow. Without,
Is that already in
because I
there?
like the concept the way it
It's
is
already,
now.
that concept already applies.
Currently written, right?
Right, so that's already in there. We already have it.
Except it
It wouldn't address a tear-down rebuild.
right,
Right, that's
yeah.
what I was, yeah.
Or even or even a remodel.
But what if, though, if you
applied that, I'm just throwing this out, 200 square foot maximum into the already non-conforming area? So in other words, you can only build so much more into the non-conforming area.
Yeah.
Is that what you're, and I don't know what that
Yeah,
number is.
pretty
but that
much.
would-
I mean,
But that's not for tear downs, that's just for additions.
it would be for both.
That'd be for tear downs.
It would be
So
for
in other
both.
words, what their point is, if you're in there by a foot, in theory, you can move out the whole house to meet that non-conforming spot. But this would limit potentially how many square feet go within that. New square feet. Or is that too complicated?
Well, you already, under the law, you can already rebuild in place as it is. So if you've got a little jut that goes into the, yeah. So the
You could build
non-conforming,
you could build the
you can build the
exact
exact.
footprint,
But if
right.
you're going to get bigger, right, if you're going to get bigger, then you don't get that, right.
Right.
So what we're proposing, and I think this is what Mr. Gilligan was getting at in his comments, and what Carrie mentioned, is you're kind of allowing somebody to expand that along the entire front of the lot. So if they've got one chunk of the house that juts into the front yard setback, and they're more than 30 feet back, now they can go the whole length.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Grable.
The point that Kerry made earlier was that the intent, I don't want to speak for you, but this is what I heard. The intent of the ordinance is to try and codify what we in fact do under the variance process. And since we seem to be able to handle it under the variance process, what if we just left it the same? Then Mr.
That was
Gilligan's
Mr.
comment
Gilligan's
would
point,
be
right.
Would be taken care of. Because I think you raised a very good point about that. And if we didn't make a change at all, we just, in certain circumstances, it might come for a variance, and then there'd be discussion here, and then there'd be an appeal to the city council, and you'd have a process that you could use to negotiate the situation. So I don't know, maybe we don't change it, because it's an interesting point.
Commissioner Forrest.
I disagree with that because I think that the variance process should not be used as design review, and that our goal should be to minimize the number of variances that come before us. Those should be exceptions to our code, and our code should be addressing things as regularly as it possibly can. And if there is some way, basically, I really like what's written so far, but the point that was brought up tonight was a good one, and so that's why I was thinking maybe square footage, further encroachment might be, of whatever number came up, might be a way to address it. And I get your point. I agree. It's nice to be able to see it, but
We have different philosophies about the variance process.
yeah.
There's a news flash.
Job security.
Commissioner Scherer.
If I think of my 8 years involved in this, the tear-down situation that this is addressing for the most part, it doesn't occur that often with this, which to me argues for Commissioner Grable's point of view. That's to me precisely what the variance process is for, is unusual situations or situations that we don't need to codify all the non-conforming things that we have going on in our community. So I feel really strongly that tear-downs are a fresh start. We need to look again at those situations, and that's where we are seeing a lot of pressure right now. I'm happy to have those part of the variance process. I would like to see them part of the variance process. I think it was appropriate for the situation that Mr. Gilligan and Mr. Bro talked about, for that to be part of the variance process.
All right, so
I think I may agree with Commissioner Grable on this one.
whoa, mark it down.
I don't know.
So let's do this. Let's leave the language for now. It sounds like we're basically having the discussion. People can think about it for a couple of weeks, and the substantive discussion will be whether we ought to even recommend this change or not. Really is where we're headed with this discussion. And Commissioner Forrest, you'll have a chance to persuade Commissioner Grable of that in 2 weeks.
That's a rock.
Speaking of such things, the next item is the garage stall requirements. Speaking of the east-going Zacks and the west-going Zacks.
So we're not, just to be sure, we're not instructing staff to modify anything. It's
Just
either
gonna
going to
leave
be
that
in or
language,
out based
right.
on our final decision.
And then we're
Okay.
going to talk about that, but I hear the beginnings of a spirited, or maybe not much of a spirit. Well, Commissioner Forrest will at least be on one side of it. But there will certainly be a spirited conversation about the garage stall requirements. There was an interesting, I think it was Mr. Brook who suggested that if you were to go with a single-car garage, that you at least require some more space, which I think goes, Commissioner Scherer, to your issue about stuff. Even if you only have one car, you're going to have stuff, and we don't want to have all your stuff everywhere. So I don't know if that requires us to have any kind of language change, but it's something to think about when we have that discussion in 2 weeks, unless you want to engage in that discussion now, Commissioner Scherer. Commissioner Grable?
As long as Commissioner Scherer is holding her comments, I will.
Get a mutual ceasefire here. I might actually be, able to finish a meeting in 3 hours for a change. So that just leaves us with the two miscellaneous cleanup items. The accessory buildings. Commissioner Grable, you got your concerns satisfied on that? I did. And the variance, the floodplain stuff is just redundant. We don't need it. Okay. Commissioner Scherer.
I want to go back to the accessory building thing and make sure that I understand this. the reason we're saying that we can eliminate the living space language is because we don't allow accessory buildings to begin with.
To have living space, to have someone living, to be a dwelling unit.
To be a dwelling unit. And do we consider an accessory building, I'm thinking of a very particular house that has a large main house, year-round kind of a breezeway thing, heated space over a garage that sits attached to the breezeway, and stairs that go up to that heated space. So that's considered attached. Even though it sort of looks like a detached garage and it goes up as a separate structure, if you can walk between it all, it's considered attached?
It's still, if it's attached by roof.
So they could have
over
living
walls.
space above that garage?
Because it's not an accessory structure.
Perhaps. It's attached to the house. It's not an accessory structure. Although if they have a separate entrance and exit and a separate furnace and kitchen and, you know, all of those things that function as a separate dwelling unit, we take a very close look at it and how they are
I mean,
attached to one
I was
another.
thinking that is the, I don't know how many of those we have in the city, but that's the kind of situation that having the living space language at least puts another roadblock in front of to make it clear to people that we don't intend for those to be a separate living space. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. I think this opens up the door for accessory structures that are not attached, that are freestanding.
The risk is
apart.
greater in the other direction, you would argue.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah. We've
I
had
accept
people
that.
look at that and say, aha, you allow this.
Right.
We don't.
Get the carriage house kind of arrangement, all right. Okay, so I think that gets through. Carrie and Chris, do you feel like you have an understanding of what we need? You know, the one comment I would say, Mr. LaForce's comment about how do we create an environment where you can still have a small house and a small lot is a fair question. I don't know what the answer to that is. But Commissioner Grable?
I think the answer to that, and Mr. Whitbeck said we need to have more low-priced houses in Edina, essentially. And I'll bet you if you polled most of the people in the city of Edina that said, do we want to have a lot more lower-priced houses in the city and lower everybody's property values, they wouldn't agree with that. And I really think Mr. LaForce's point has probably got to go to what's the market situation in the city.
We
You know,
may
I mean,
not
we
be able
talk
to regulate
about
that.
we talk about affordable housing and that, and we provide for affordable housing units in multifamily situations, and there may be some lots in town that are appropriate for a smaller house, but, you know, as Commissioner Platter said, Edina is a very desirable place to be, so, and the market's going to be what the market is.
I think the concern is we're losing our variety of housing stock, and that younger couples who a few years ago maybe could have moved in and wanted to because of their children or whatever, and they keep telling us, the demographers, that we need more young families moving in, that we're just losing that variety of housing stock and you know, kind of the eclecticism of our community as well. And I don't know if you know, I'm concerned as I look at these changes, and I think we've gone through a good process. I'm concerned when I come back to it and I think about the number of people that over the last few years that have spoken to me about they're concerned because their block is changing so much. They're losing what they moved into the neighborhood for. Are we really addressing that concern? You know, the whole, what some might call a McMansion issue, the looming large house over the story and a half, whatever. People, that's bothering people, and we've heard it over and over. And I'm not sure if we're really addressing that, or if we can without getting into design issues even further. But I'm concerned because that was kind of the impetus for us getting going on a lot of this. So I don't know what the answer is.
I think we have addressed it somewhat in some of the things that we're doing. If we could take a look at it, you know, some kind of part of the thing that Mr. Schroeder has raised before concerns trees, and maybe we need to have give some thought to some kind of tree protection thing and preserve the canopy and, you know, you preserve the look of the communities and that type of thing. But, you know, I've got a feeling if you talk to the school board, the school people, they would say, you know, there's not a projected declining enrollment in the Edina Public Schools. Maybe there is, I don't know, but.
I just gotta say, all the houses around me, they're moving in with 2 or 3 kids.
Yeah.
So, I mean, rarely see a home that kids aren't moving into there.
Yeah.
Rarely with a new home.
I guess I've just heard from people who would love to be able to find a home in Edina that's under 400,000 or something that is in a nice little neighborhood like it was 4 years ago. And I'm not saying, I mean, that's idealistic, whatever, and I'm not saying I want to go further and be more intrusive with our ordinance changes either, but I also don't want to be a Pollyanna about it and think, oh, this is going to fix everything, because maybe the emperor's wearing no clothes still.
Well, I think it's an important issue. I just question whether it's in the scope of what we're trying to do. And I think we can say, you know, we certainly, I don't think we have a minimum size house. We're not preventing somebody from building a smaller house. Some people want to prevent people from building a smaller garage, I think. But we can come back to that.
Oh, when we were so close to the end, you had to throw the gasoline on the fire. All right.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
I think we have exhausted our commentary on this. This was very good. I want to emphasize again, the public comment was terrific, and I really appreciate people coming out and sharing. It really does help us. And those people who think these things are all done before we have a public hearing, it's not true. We love to hear from folks because they're the ones who are dealing with the situations we're trying to address. So thanks to everybody who came out and gave public comment tonight.
And to poke holes in what we're proposing and,
right.
and realizing and thinking through things as to, again, one of the things we stated was not to make the condition, you know, not to make the conditions worse, if you will.
Right.
So, you know, how do we make positive changes overall or good changes?
All right, so nothing further on that item. We will take this up at our next meeting and hopefully reach some conclusions and make some recommendations to the City Council. Next up is correspondence and petitions. We have Council Connection as well as our attendance sheet in the packet, and everyone can take a look at that. Chair and commission member comments. The only comment that I have is I understand the City Council has appointed a community advisory committee on the Grandview project, and Commissioner Schroeder and I are going to serve on that along with, I believe, 9 other members. So we'll be updating you as we learn more about that process. Bill Neuendorf, the city's economic development director, is going to staff that process. I'm sure Carrie and Chris will probably be called upon from time to time to engage. So we'll keep you up to date as that goes on.
Are those members public now?
Yes. So I don't have them off the top of my head.
Does anyone have who they are?
We should be able to post that
post it
somewhere.
I can email them to you.
Okay, thank you.
And that would be a good thing. I'm sure Bill is going to want to get that on the website as well. Any member comments? Commissioner Grable.
Just a comment. This is my 9th year, going into my 9th year on the commission. Tonight was the first night that I recall that there was a public outcry about anything, and I found it quite offensive that the participants in the audience couldn't be a little bit more adult about things. One woman's phone went off twice, 2 other phones went off, and I just think it shows a lack of respect for the commission when the people. I appreciated the comments that were made during the public hearing, but I think we need to emphasize that, look, this isn't a basketball game, for crying out loud, and you ought to respect the proceeding a little bit more than they do.
Commissioner Schroeder.
I just want to respond to or offer a comment about something Mr. Frankel brought up during the community comment section. And I appreciate the concerns and comments he brought forward about the home being built next to him. But he made a reference to Reston, Virginia. And kind of wondered why we couldn't have the same kind of control that Reston has. Reston was a planned community. If I'm remembering my community planning history, Reston's a planned community, not a municipality, governed by an association, totally different situation. They have much more ability to control what they do by the way they're actually governing the residents who live there.
So when he said it was the first...
It's a much newer community, too.
1960s.
So Horace's Edina is being built over 100 years.
Correct.
Thank you for that piece of history, Commissioner Schroeder. I guess I have a tolerance for people using terms in less precise ways. I mean, we do a lot of urban planning. Urban planning and enforcement of the regulations we have are two different things. And, I like to think that we do good urban planning in this community, and wouldn't be up here if I didn't think we did. But I understand his frustration, too.
I was just to say, make the comment on the enforcement person that was just hired, and I guess I'd like to get kind of some feedback updates from that and what's happening out there and what's, what are they seeing? Is there anything that is obvious that we've missed, or even from any standpoint, either construction code or the construction ordinance or anything from the zoning codes, kind of have a continuous, maybe we have regular reports or something, I don't know, from this person.
I think that's a terrific idea, because that person's going to see things, and there might be zoning changes that we can be making based on observations that they're making.
Is there a record of things that have come forward in the interim that they can use as a starting point then as well?
You suspect their desk will be full when they walk in?
I mean, at least issues-wise, then they can prioritize what they really need to go after first.
All right. Any comments from staff?
Just that's a fantastic idea. Maybe after a couple months, we'll bring Cindy in and introduce her to the commission, and we could have that as an agenda item. What
Good.
She's seeing out in the field, how are things going? Are there any changes that we need to make?
And if I could just add to that, I think we're almost talking about two different reports. Ones that give us feedback on a lot of general issues and things we may miss, but I think it would also be good. We've heard a lot from the public about sensing a lack of enforcement. It'd be good to have, that too. Well, where are the violations?
Whatever she is.
Right.
The only other thing I'd add, not on that topic, but just in general, is we have a number of other kind of items we're trying to work on that are in our work plan. I've wanted us to kind of get through this ordinance stuff before I start tackling those, but we'll address those at a future date, lest we totally wear out our commission. I think that's all we have. I would take I don't know who. Claudia's not here. Who makes the motion?
I would move that we adjourn the meeting.
I'll second.
You don't want to have a long debate about adjournment? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you all.